The 6-year-old girl knelt on the floor, tears streaming down her face, her trembling hands washing her stepmother's feet, while the woman scolded her relentlessly. At that very moment, the door burst open, and the millionaire father froze in shock at the scene before his eyes. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and tell me which city you're watching from. Let's follow together these heartwarming stories, the touching stories I want to share with you. Now, let's begin the story. The wide living room of the mansion was drowned in a heavy silence. The chandelier cast a soft golden light, reflecting off the polished tile floor, but there was no warmth in this place. In the middle of that space, a little girl with trembling hands struggled to scrub the feet set carelessly in front of her. That was Taylor Coleman, 6 years old, with large hazel eyes, rosy fair skin, and messy brown hair that never seemed properly brushed. People often smiled when they looked at her, because even in her exhaustion, her face still radiated innocence and heartbreaking sweetness. But behind those eyes was a deep sorrow, the sorrow of a child who had lost her mother too soon. Taylor's mother, Emma Coleman, had passed away when she was only 3. A cruel case of pancreatic cancer had taken the gentle woman, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. For Taylor, her memories of her mother were only fragments, the soft, sweet scent in her hair, the warm hands that soothed her when she cried. Since that day, Taylor lived with her father, Jeremy Coleman, a well-known businessman in the automobile industry. He had built Coleman Motors, a car manufacturing empire with tens of thousands of workers. Jeremy loved his daughter, but the weight of his work and the pain of losing his wife drove him to bury himself in the company, believing that providing Taylor with material comfort was enough. 6 months earlier, Jeremy remarried. The woman was Vivian, 34 years old, beautiful, charming, and socially graceful. They met through a matchmaking dinner, and under the hopeful eyes of close friends, Jeremy thought this might be a chance for Taylor to have a family again. At first, Vivian was sweet and tender, cradling Taylor in her arms like her own child and whispering, "From now on, you have a mother." Taylor believed her, her young heart desperately clinging to the affection she had longed for. But that tenderness existed only when Jeremy was present. The moment he stepped out the door, Vivian's sweetness vanished as if it had never been there, revealing someone else entirely, harsh and cruel toward the little girl. Now, in front of Taylor, Vivian lounged on the leather sofa, a red silk dress hugging her body, her feet resting in a basin filled with wet clay. In her hand, she held a glass of deep red wine, her eyes sweeping over the child with contempt. A faint smile curled on her lips, but her voice was cold and cutting. "Hurry up, why are you so slow? Do you want me to wait forever?" Taylor startled, her wet hands shaking. Her voice was so soft it was almost only for herself. "My hands are so tired. Please, Mom, let me rest a little." Vivian slammed the glass down on the glass table, the sharp clatter echoing across the room. Her eyes blazed. "Look at yourself, so young and already whining. Do you think you're a princess? Don't imagine that just because you're Jeremy Coleman's daughter, I'll flatter you. I can't stand your teary face anymore." Terrified, Taylor lowered her head, her small hands scrubbing faster, nearly scratching through the cloth. Tears dripped from her cheeks, mixing with the clay, spreading across the white fabric. "I'm sorry, I'll go faster." Vivian let out a bitter laugh, her voice dripping with scorn. "That's right. Apologize. A child like you should only know how to obey. Crying won't make anyone pity you, especially when your father isn't home. Stop right now, or I'll make you kneel here all night." Suddenly, the large door swung open. The sound of leather shoes struck firmly against the wooden floor. A tall man stepped inside, Jeremy Coleman. He wore a gray suit, his shoulders still dusted from the factory floor. His usually stern face froze in shock. Before him was a scene beyond belief. His daughter, little Taylor, kneeling on the floor with muddy hands and tear-stained cheeks, washing his wife's feet. Jeremy went rigid. His throat tightened, and his voice rasped out hoarse. "Vivian, what is this?" Taylor looked up, her tearful eyes glistening. She wanted to run to her father, but her small body felt chained by fear. Her lips trembled, yet no words came out. Jeremy strode forward, his eyes blazing with fury. "What have you made her do?" Vivian faltered for a moment, But within seconds, she had already switched her expression. Her voice quivered, her eyes glittering with tears as if about to fall. "You misunderstood me. I didn't force her. Earlier, I was cleaning by myself. I got tired and sat down to rest. The girl came over and said she wanted to help me, that she wanted to wash my feet so I wouldn't be tired. I even told her no, but she kept begging. I thought she truly cared about me, so I let her. I never imagined you'd come home right at this moment and see it the wrong way." She placed a hand on her chest as if deeply wounded. "Jeremy, I just want to teach her how to love, how to care about others. Why would you think I'm mistreating her?" Taylor trembled in her father's arms, her lips pressed tight, her eyes shimmering with tears. She didn't dare protest, her fear clamping down on her small throat. Jeremy held his daughter in his arms, her frail little body pressed against his chest, trembling with every breath. He could clearly feel the exhaustion, the smell of sweat mixed with damp earth clinging to her. His arms tightened around her, as if he could shield her from every wound in the world. He lifted his eyes and stared at Vivian with a cold, suspicious look. Without another word, Jeremy carried his daughter straight up the stairs, leaving behind a heavy silence. Vivian stood frozen, her eyes flashing briefly with hatred before she hid it behind a forced smile. That night, the small light in Taylor's room glowed. The girl sat curled up on her bed, clutching tightly to an old brown teddy bear, the gift her mother had given her on her second birthday. The bear's fur was worn thin, but for Taylor, it was the only place that still carried her mother's warmth. She whispered into the teddy bear's ear, her voice choked and broken, as if she was afraid anyone might hear. "Daddy, I just want Mommy to really love me." Her lonely whisper echoed in the wide room, leaving behind a crushing emptiness. It marked the beginning of a new journey for father and daughter, a journey shadowed by darkness. Jeremy Coleman closed his daughter's bedroom door and stood for a long while in the hallway. The ticking of the grandfather clock echoed with heavy beats. In his mind, he still saw Taylor kneeling on the floor, her little hands smeared with dirt, her trembling eyes pleading for help. He had carried her to bed, left the lamp dim, and walked away, but each step felt like pressing down on stone. He could not understand what had just happened in his own family, or why his daughter was so terrified. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house seemed arranged to conceal everything. The dining table was covered with a white cloth, the dishes gleamed. On the table sat roasted chicken, cream soup, garlic bread, all the dishes Jeremy liked. Vivian appeared in a light blue dress, her face carefully made up, her smile gentle. She seemed like a completely different person compared to yesterday. As Jeremy and Taylor came downstairs, Vivian greeted them warmly. "Darling, sit down. I prepared a special breakfast for the whole family. Taylor, sweet girl, eat a lot today. It will make Mommy so happy." She placed a golden piece of chicken into Taylor's bowl, her voice sweet as honey. Jeremy sat at the table, his expression softening a little at this gesture of care. Taylor remained silent. She sat curled in her chair, her hand trembling as she held the spoon. Her tiny foot shifted back under the chair as if trying to avoid someone's gaze. Beneath the table, Vivian discreetly stretched out her foot and kicked the child hard in the shin. Taylor flinched. The spoon slipped from her hand and clattered loudly onto the floor. Her face turned pale. She bent down quickly to pick it up and whispered, I'm sorry." Jeremy frowned, looking at his daughter with confusion. Before he could ask, Vivian smoothly intervened, placing a hand lightly on Taylor's shoulder, her voice unbelievably gentle. "It's all right, sweetheart. Just be more careful next time." But her sidelong glance flashed with cold sharpness, making Taylor tremble and lower her head. Jeremy sensed his daughter's tension, yet when he looked at his wife, all he saw was a tender smile and such polished grace that he found nothing to reproach. During the meal, Vivian set down her spoon and spoke cheerfully. "Darling, I want to tell you something. My mother, Margaret, will be staying with us for a while. I'm afraid I can't manage everything alone. Taking care of the house, looking after Taylor, and still wanting time with you too." The door opened, and a woman entered. Margaret, Vivian's mother, was about 56, her dyed black hair neatly pinned back, her face heavily made up but still marked with wrinkles. She walked with a measured stride, her eyes scanning the room before stopping on Taylor. Margaret gave a thin smile, her shrill voice cutting clear. "This girl. She looks so frail, I doubt she'll be of any use at all." Taylor startled, her hands clutching the spoon tightly. She lowered her head, her shoulders shrinking as though she wished to vanish from the woman's eyes. Jeremy's brow furrowed. He was about to respond, but Vivian quickly laughed it off, slipping her arm through his, her tone dripping with sweetness. "That's just how my mother talks. She really cares about Taylor, but she's too straightforward." Jeremy said nothing. He picked up a piece of chicken and placed it in his daughter's bowl, his voice gentle. "Eat, Taylor." The little girl nodded slightly, scooping up rice, but throughout the meal she only managed half a bowl. From time to time she glanced at her father, her eyes silently begging for help, only to look down again the instant Vivian's gaze swept across her. Jeremy noticed, but reassured himself. Perhaps the child only needed time to adjust. He was already consumed by the company's biggest project, the new line of electric cars the market eagerly awaited. For years, Coleman Motors had survived on traditional sedans and SUVs, and now he had to lead the brand into a new era. He told himself, as long as she has a mother to care for her, I can focus on my work. Breakfast ended in a strange quiet. Vivian and Margaret chatted with Jeremy about redecorating the living room and the parties they planned. Jeremy listened, nodding absent-mindedly, but his thoughts kept straying toward Taylor. The girl sat silently, her bowl barely touched. That afternoon, Jeremy was at the company office. He signed a stack of documents and discussed with the chief engineer about testing the new battery for the electric car line. But from time to time, the image of his daughter sitting withdrawn at breakfast returned to him. He suddenly wondered, am I missing something? Then he brushed it away. No, Vivian will take care of her. She is gentle, thoughtful. She just needs time. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Taylor was assigned to clean alongside Margaret. The older woman stood with her arms crossed, her tone sharp and scolding. Don't you dare drop anything again. I don't want to see a single towel stained. A girl who is clumsy will never be loved by anyone. Taylor lowered her head. Yes, ma'am. Margaret gave a cold snort and walked off, leaving the girl to continue wiping, each movement careful yet heavy. Night fell, and the mansion grew quiet. Jeremy came home late, weary after a long meeting. As he walked down the hallway on the second floor, light from Taylor's room spilled through the crack of the door. Jeremy stopped, his hand resting on the knob. From inside, he clearly heard faint sobs, as if Taylor was trying to hold them back so they would not escape into the night. His chest tightened. His hand clenched the doorknob, but he did not open it. In his head, two voices clashed. One urged, go inside, hold her, ask if she is all right. The other weighed heavy. She's only being fussy, everything will be fine. Tomorrow there's a mountain of work waiting at the office. In the end, Jeremy let go of the knob. He stood still for a few seconds, then turned away and walked off. Behind the door, the muffled sobs continued, small but cutting into a father's heart like a knife, foreshadowing the dark days drawing near. Jeremy returned to his office after ignoring Taylor's muffled sobs. He sat silently in his leather swivel chair, his broad hands pressing against his temples. Papers from the company were scattered across the desk, the design for the new electric car model still lying open, but he could not read a single word. The image of his daughter curled up in her room, her choked cries held back, kept pounding in his mind. Jeremy closed his eyes, yet the picture only grew sharper. Part of him wanted to go back to her room immediately, to hold Taylor and ask her everything. But another part whispered that maybe things were not that serious, that perhaps he was overthinking. That inner conflict clung to him through the night, leaving him tossing and turning before finally drifting into restless sleep. The next morning, Jeremy left the mansion early for the company. He told Vivian to take care of Taylor, then hurried to his car. As always, he believed he was doing the right thing, focusing on work so his family would have a secure future. But the moment Jeremy was out of sight, the atmosphere inside the house changed instantly. Vivian sat in the living room with a cup of coffee in her hand, her eyes glued to a fashion magazine. Her voice rang out, cold and empty. Taylor, come down here. Hurry up. Taylor rushed downstairs, her hair still messy from a restless night's sleep. She whispered softly, Yes, I'm here. Vivian glanced at her, the corner of her lips curling into a mocking smile. Today the floor has to shine, not a single stain left. Take the mop and start right now. Margaret walked out from the kitchen, one hand on her hip, her voice sharp and harsh. You heard her. Get to it. Stop standing there like a statue. Taylor nodded, clutching the mop that was almost bigger than her small body. She dragged it along the floor, her little shoulders trembling under the weight. Vivian leaned against the sofa, watching with contempt, and said, "Being a rich girl doesn't mean you get to sit around. In this house, everyone works." "Got it?" Taylor murmured. "Yes, ma'am." Her tiny hands grew damp with water, her feet slipping across the polished tiles. When she turned too quickly, she lost her balance and fell hard to the ground. A dull thud echoed, followed by a soft cry of pain. Her arm scraped against the edge of a wooden chair, leaving a bloody scratch. Taylor winced, struggling to hold back her tears. Margaret saw it and let out a shrill laugh. Completely useless. Can't even clean a floor properly. Vivian tilted her chin, arms crossed, and ordered, "Get up. No crying here. Keep cleaning." Taylor bit her lip, picked up the mop again, her eyes brimming with tears, but she kept going. That afternoon, Jeremy drove his daughter to school. When he held her small hand, he froze. Red marks circled Taylor's wrist, and a fresh scratch ran across it. Jeremy stopped, gently turning her hand. "Taylor, what happened to your hand?" Startled, Taylor quickly pulled back, her eyes wet but refusing to meet his. I just fell." Jeremy frowned, unease tightening in his chest. His voice softened. "Tell me the truth, sweetheart. Did someone hurt you?" Taylor shook her head, her lips trembling as though afraid. "No, nobody. I just fell." At that moment, Vivian walked out of the house. She smiled sweetly, sliding her arm around her husband's shoulder. "You worry too much. She's energetic. Kids fall when they play. It happens to everyone." Jeremy looked at his wife, then at his daughter. Taylor sat curled in the back seat, clutching her backpack tightly to her chest. Her eyes stayed fixed on the window, avoiding all glances. He remained silent the entire drive to school, his heart heavy. That evening, while Jeremy worked in his office, Taylor sat alone on her bed. Beside her was a worn-out brown teddy bear, its fur thinned from years of love. She pulled a small slip of paper from her drawer and scribbled in uneven handwriting, "Daddy, I'm scared of Mom." Taylor folded the paper neatly, tucked it into the teddy bear's belly, and hugged it tightly. She whispered so softly only she could hear, "You're my only friend. Don't ever tell anyone this secret." In the hallway, Margaret passed by and heard the faint rustle of paper. She peeked through the crack in the door, saw Taylor clutching the bear, and scoffed with a sneer. This girl, always pretending to be pitiful. She walked away, leaving the small room heavy with gloom. The next evening, just outside the mansion gate, a familiar figure stood silently. It was Maria, the former housemaid. She was about 50, her black hair streaked with gray, her sun-kissed face gentle and kind. Maria had cared for Taylor since she was a toddler, but ever since Vivian moved in, she had been dismissed with the excuse that the family needed privacy. Tears blurred Maria's eyes as she looked through the yard, seeing Taylor bent over, wiping each wooden chair with her tiny hands. The child moved slowly, exhausted, too afraid to lift her head. Maria clenched her fists, whispering through choked breaths, "Doesn't he see anything? That little girl is being tormented every day." She stood there for a few more minutes, then quietly turned away, her figure fading into the twilight. Inside the mansion, the harsh laughter of Vivian and Margaret echoed, drowning out the silent cries of a little heart no one seemed to hear. After Maria quietly left through the villa gate, inside the living room, Vivian and Margaret were still chatting. Their shrill laughter echoed, drowning out the silence outside. Vivian flipped through a beauty magazine, her eyes lighting up when she came across an article about the benefits of fresh honey for skincare. "There, look at this." Margaret tilted her chin toward the magazine. "They say honey is more precious than gold. And how long can skin stay beautiful anyway? It only lasts if you take care of it." Vivian nodded, her lips curling into a calculating smile. In the back garden there's a huge beehive. That way we don't need to buy anything, we'll still have fresh honey. Right, Mom? Tomorrow we'll have natural face masks. Margaret narrowed her eyes and shrugged. You plan to climb up there yourself? Those bees aren't friendly. Vivian chuckled softly, her gaze shifting toward the staircase where Taylor usually came down. No, the girl will do it. She needs to be useful. I've thought about it. Making her collect the honey saves us the trouble and teaches her to obey. That afternoon, the sun slanted low, and the shadow of the maple tree stretched across the backyard. Taylor was dragged outside, her little legs trembling as she stared at the large hive dangling high above. The buzzing of bees surrounded her, sending shivers of fear down her spine. Vivian crossed her arms beside Margaret, her voice commanding. Climb up, now! Taylor shook her head furiously, hugging her arms tight across her chest. I'm scared of bees. I can't do it. Vivian's face darkened. She stepped closer and shouted, You have to do it. Or do you want me to call my mother to teach you a lesson? Margaret's eyes gleamed with amusement, her lips curling into a cruel smile. Taylor trembled violently, her lips turning pale. She knew that being taught a lesson by Mother meant harsh scolding, maybe even going to bed without dinner. Swallowing her tears, she slowly walked to the tree trunk. Her tiny hand pressed against the rough bark as she tried to climb. Vivian urged her on, her tone cold as ice. Hurry up, stop pretending to be weak. Taylor bit her lip hard, her hands gripping the bark. She climbed, her small body shaking with fear. When she reached the lower branch, she struggled to keep her balance. Her heart pounded wildly. Her vision blurred as she saw the hive swaying in the breeze. Take it, Vivian's voice rang out. Taylor's trembling hand touched the branch, accidentally shaking the hive. In an instant, the buzzing grew fierce. The bees burst out of the hive like a black cloud, swarming straight at her tiny body. Ah! Taylor screamed. Her hands slipped, her small frame swayed and fell. Stings pierced her skin one after another, burning and sharp. She crashed down onto the grass. Vivian and Margaret stepped back, their faces feigning panic. Margaret muttered, Oh God, she really fell. Vivian leaned forward, but before she could react, the screech of brakes sounded outside the gate. Jeremy had just arrived home. His eyes froze on the scene, his daughter lying motionless on the grass, her face swollen, her body covered with bee stings. Taylor! Jeremy roared, his heart nearly stopping. He rushed forward, scooping her into his arms. Taylor's breath was faint, her eyes shut tight. Get out of my way, he growled at Vivian, who was stammering excuses, then sprinted straight to his car. The vehicle sped away, leaving Margaret and Vivian standing frozen in shock. At the hospital, the emergency lights blazed. Jeremy carried Taylor inside, his voice hoarse with desperation. Save her, please. Doctor. Susan Miller, a sturdy woman in her 40s, hurried over. She was a well-known pediatrician, respected for her dedication after years of service at the hospital. Susan signaled to the nurses. Prepare the antihistamine. Start 4 fluids immediately. Full body check for the child. Jeremy was pushed outside the emergency room, his heart gripped like a vice. He paced the hallway, his hands trembling in clenched fists. After a while, Susan stepped out, her expression grave. The girl suffered multiple bee stings, but we've managed the reaction. However, there's another issue. Jeremy rushed forward, his voice urgent. What issue? Tell me. Susan sighed. The child is mildly malnourished. I also found many old wounds, scratches that have healed but left scars. And there are psychological signs suggesting she may be experiencing emotional distress. Were you aware of this? Jeremy was struck silent. He staggered, gripping the wall to keep from collapsing. His whole body shook, his mind blank. Vivian arrived just then, running up and pretending to burst into tears. You think I'm that cruel? The girl was mischievous. She climbed the tree on her own. I was heartbroken too. Jeremy spun around, his eyes blazing red. You still dare to speak? Answer me this. How did you let my daughter live in such a way that her body is covered in scars? Vivian pretended to tremble, covering her face with her hands. You've misunderstood. I only wanted to teach her to be strong. I never thought... Jeremy refused to listen. He shoved past Vivian and entered the hospital room. Taylor lay on the bed, her face swollen from bee stings, her lips pale. He sat down, gripping her tiny hand, feeling the coldness of her fingertips. His voice broke into a trembling whisper. "My child, what have I let you suffer through?" In the sterile white room, the steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence, but Jeremy's mind was in turmoil. For the first time, he felt like the greatest failure in the world, a father who had not protected his only daughter. In the hospital room, Jeremy still sat motionless beside his daughter's bed. Taylor lay unconscious, her face swollen, her lips bluish from the bee stings. He clutched her tiny hand, his deep eyes brimming with tears. All these years, he had thought of himself as strong, a businessman who had pushed through countless crises in the automotive industry. But now, faced with his daughter lying still, Jeremy saw himself only as a failed father. The morning light slowly filtered through the window, casting a golden hue across the hospital room. Suddenly, a soft knock sounded at the door. Jeremy lifted his weary eyes. The door opened, and a woman stepped inside. She wore a worn beige coat, her frame frail, her dark hair streaked with gray and tied back neatly. Her eyes carried worry and an indescribable sadness. Jeremy froze. Maria? It was Maria Lopez, the former housekeeper who had cared for Taylor since she was a child. Vivian had dismissed her not long ago, claiming the family needed privacy. Maria stood silently, her hands twisting together. She drew a deep breath and spoke, her voice trembling yet resolute. "I'm sorry to disturb you, sir, but I can't stay silent anymore. I know Taylor is here because someone informed me. A nurse friend of mine at this hospital called me, saying your little girl had been admitted after being stung by bees. The moment I heard Taylor's name, I couldn't sit still. I witnessed too much before I was dismissed. The child wasn't disobedient like she said. She was being mistreated." Jeremy was stunned. His heart clenched painfully. His voice came out hoarse. "Tell me clearly, Maria. I want to hear everything." Maria stepped closer, her eyes filling with tears. "I saw them forcing Taylor to do housework like a servant, scrubbing floors, washing towels, carrying heavy buckets of water. She's only 6 years old, with such tiny hands, yet she had to kneel and scrub every corner of the house. If she was slow, she was scolded harshly. One day, I even saw her being kicked just for dropping a spoon. I tried to intervene, but Vivian grew furious, told me I was meddling in family matters, and threw me out. You know the excuse they gave: the family needs privacy. In truth, they just wanted me gone so no one would witness those terrible things." Jeremy was speechless. Fragments of memory rushed back like a storm. Taylor's frightened eyes, the red scratches on her arms, the time she whispered, "I fell down." All of it now linked together into a horrifying picture. He held his head, trembling. "My God, how blind have I been?" Maria pressed a hand to her chest, her voice breaking. "Sir, Taylor has always been a good child. She never dared talk back. She only endured. She was afraid of making you sad, afraid of disappointing you, so she stayed silent. But you are her only hope. Please, don't let her suffer another day." Jeremy looked at his unconscious daughter, then turned back to Maria. In his eyes, a firm determination ignited. His voice dropped low. "Rest assured, I won't let anyone harm my daughter for another second." The next day, Jeremy decided to return home early. He gave no warning, nor did he bring his driver along. His heart burned like fire, each step down the company hall a heavy stride toward the truth. Throughout the meeting, he couldn't register a single word from the engineers. The image of Taylor being tormented, as Maria had described, replayed endlessly in his mind. By late afternoon, his car stopped at the gates of the mansion. Jeremy turned off the engine, pushed the door open, his shoulders tight as if about to burst. He opened the gate and strode inside. From the entryway, angry shouts echoed, resounding through the house. "Kneel down, clean it properly. Do you think you're some kind of princess in this house?" Jeremy rushed forward. The sight before him nearly drove him mad. Taylor on her knees, her small hands clutching a rag, her eyes red, her lips trembling. Vivian stood with her arms crossed, scolding nonstop. Beside her, Margaret stood with her hands on her hips, pointing like a prison guard. In an instant, Jeremy could no longer contain himself. His roar shook the walls like thunder. Enough! The entire room jolted. Vivian jumped in fright. Margaret froze in place. Taylor looked up, her tearful eyes lighting up at the sight of her father, and she broke down sobbing, dropping the rag from her hands. Jeremy strode forward, his gaze blazing. He pointed straight at the door, his voice a growl. "Get out of my house immediately." Vivian's face went pale. She lunged forward, collapsing at his feet, wailing, "Honey, please don't do this. I just wanted to teach your daughter respect, to make her obedient. You've misunderstood me. Everything I did was for Taylor's sake." Jeremy shoved her away, his voice cold as ice. "Be quiet. I trusted you for far too long. My little girl ended up in the hospital, covered in wounds, and you dare stand here saying it was for her own good? I will not allow you or your mother to hurt my daughter for one more second. Both of you, get out!" Margaret opened her mouth to protest, but Jeremy's burning glare forced the words back down her throat. He scooped Taylor up into his arms, holding her tightly, and walked straight away. The household staff quietly gathered Vivian and Margaret's luggage and placed it outside the gate. The two women were pushed out. Vivian wiped her tears, but in the depths of her eyes, a spark of hatred glimmered. She clenched her teeth, whispering venomously, "If I can't stay here, I'll make sure you and your daughter lose everything." That heavy curse echoed in the evening wind, foretelling a storm even more terrifying that lay ahead. After driving Vivian and Margaret out of the mansion, Jeremy spent the entire evening sitting beside Taylor. The Coleman estate sank into silence. No more shouting, no more mocking laughter from Vivian and Margaret, only the quiet ticking of the clock. Jeremy sat by his daughter's bed, watching Taylor drift into sleep. The red welts from the bee stings still marked her skin, and each glimpse of them sent a sharp ache through his chest. That same night, he made a call and hired a reliable private nurse to care for Taylor. Her name was Linda Perez, a woman in her 30s with extensive pediatric experience. She arrived at dawn, carrying a medical kit and the necessary supplies. Her voice was warm as she said, "You don't need to worry. I'll monitor her condition every hour. The bee stings will heal quickly. What matters most is comforting her emotionally. She needs to feel safe." Jeremy nodded, resting a hand on Linda's shoulder, and spoke softly, "Please take care of her. I'll be back as soon as I finish what I need to do." He glanced at Taylor one last time before leaving the mansion. The little girl slept peacefully, her arms wrapped tightly around an old teddy bear. Jeremy drew in a deep breath and told himself, "She will never suffer another wound again. But I also need to protect the company, to secure everything for her future." By morning, the Coleman Motors building gleamed under the early Sunday. Employees moved busily, and the media still buzzed with gossip about the divorce and rumors surrounding his family. But Jeremy walked into the grand lobby with calm composure. His eyes were sharp, as if declaring, "Nothing will bring me down." Inside the boardroom, the directors had already gathered. On the screen, the prototype of a new generation electric car was displayed. This was the project Jeremy had staked the reputation of Coleman Motors on. Rising to his feet, he placed a hand firmly on the table, his voice steady and deliberate. "Even though my family has faced upheaval, this company will not stop. This electric car will launch on schedule. We will prove that Coleman Motors not only stands strong but leads the way." Some members exchanged looks, then nodded. Jeremy's resolve eased the tension in the room. After the meeting, Jeremy returned to his office. A thick stack of documents already awaited him on the desk. Then a familiar voice came from behind. "Jeremy." He looked up. Stephen Grant entered, his longtime personal attorney and legal advisor, dressed in a dark gray suit with a neatly knotted tie, his salt and pepper hair combed back. His face carried the calm authority of a man who knew the law inside and out. Jeremy managed a weary smile. "Stephen, you came at the right time." Stephen set a folder on the desk and pulled out a chair. "I've prepared some documents. After the divorce, the media is circling, and so are the competitors. If we don't act quickly, legal troubles may arise. You should sign these as soon as possible, just to be safe." Jeremy opened the file and flipped through a few pages. The clauses were packed with words, nothing but dense legal language. He frowned, turned a few more pages, then closed it. "Thank you, Stephen, but I can't sign this yet. I need to read it carefully. You know me. I don't put my signature down unless I fully understand." Stephen hesitated. For a brief moment, the smile on his lips seemed frozen. Then, just as quickly, he chuckled and tapped the table lightly. "Of course, Jeremy. That caution is exactly what brought you success. But remember, the market doesn't wait for us." Jeremy nodded, his eyes still thoughtful. As Stephen stood up, Jeremy caught a fleeting look of irritation in the lawyer's eyes. It vanished so quickly it was hard to grasp, but Jeremy could feel a cold draft sweep through. That evening, inside a luxurious bar in the heart of the city, neon lights of blue and red shimmered across glasses of liquor. In a shadowed corner, Vivian sat with her arms crossed, her crimson lips curling in disdain. Beside her, Margaret sipped strong liquor, her eyes glinting with calculation. The door opened. Stephen Grant walked in, sharp in a black suit, his demeanor calm. He approached their table, sat down, a polite smile on his face. Vivian leaned in, her voice smooth as silk yet laced with venom. "Stephen, you finally came. You once said you were sick of spending your life taking orders from Jeremy. This is your chance to step out of that shadow." Stephen raised his brows, his tone measured. "What chance?" Margaret set her glass down, her voice cutting like ice. "My daughter and I were thrown out of that house like trash. But the game isn't over. We know Jeremy's weaknesses, both in his family and in his company. If certain papers were to be arranged at the right time, his fortune wouldn't remain intact." Vivian locked eyes with Stephen, her voice dropping lower, dripping with scheming intent. "Help me. You won't just be a hired lawyer anymore. You'll have a place beside real power. All you need to do is let a few documents slide across the table without Jeremy catching on. The rest, leave that to us." Stephen swirled his glass, watching the red liquid ripple. He stayed silent for a long while, letting the jazz music drift by, then took a slow sip. Setting the glass down, his gaze darkened. At last, he gave a faint nod. Vivian caught that nod, her lips curving upward. She pulled out her phone and quickly typed a message to Cheryl, the toxic friend who had once urged her to marry into this family as her ticket to a new life. A short line glowed on the screen. "The plan has begun." Outside, the city lights gleamed brightly, but in the shadows, a trap had already been set. And Jeremy, along with little Taylor, had no idea that the real storm was only just beginning to gather. The mansion, once suffocating, was now slowly coming back to life. No more harsh yelling, no more malicious eyes tracking Taylor's every step. Only Jeremy and his daughter remained, surrounded by a few loyal people, trying to rediscover a peaceful rhythm of life. Taylor was gradually recovering. The bee stings had gone down, leaving only faint traces on her pale skin. Linda, the private nurse Jeremy had hired, monitored her health every day. She applied ointment, checked her temperature, and gently reassured her whenever Taylor flinched in pain. "Just hang in there a little longer," Linda whispered. "The wounds will heal soon, and you'll be running around again." Maria had also returned. This time, no one could force her to leave. For Taylor, her return felt like regaining a piece of the home she had lost. The little girl clung to Maria, telling her small stories, sometimes only, "I dreamed of Mom," or "My doll can talk." Maria listened, holding her hand tightly, letting the child feel she was not alone. One weekend morning, Jeremy stepped into his daughter's room and found Taylor hugging her old teddy bear, staring at the drawings she had been coloring. He tapped lightly on the door, his voice softer than ever. "Today I'll take you to the car plant. Do you want to see where Daddy works?" Taylor's eyes lit up. She jumped to her feet and nodded eagerly. "Really, Daddy? I can go with you?" Jeremy bent down and stroked her soft hair. "Yes, but you have to promise not to run around. I'll show you the newest car I'm working on." Taylor raised her hand, speaking with solemnity as if making an oath. "I promise. I'll be good." The Coleman Motors electric car plant was huge and modern. The scent of fresh paint and heated metal lingered in the air. Workers stopped what they were doing and bowed slightly when they saw their boss walk in with the small girl. Taylor's eyes widened, filled with curiosity. Jeremy led her to a silver electric car, the model he had spent 2 years developing. He opened the door and lifted her into the driver's seat. Taylor placed her tiny hands on the steering wheel, tilted her head, and burst into laughter. "Daddy, this car is like a horse. It will take me running fast, right?" Jeremy laughed, his gaze softening. "That's right, sweetheart. It will take you anywhere you want, as long as Daddy is always by your side." Some engineers nearby stopped in their tracks. They glanced at one another, astonished. The man known as the strict, uncompromising president was now bent down, tenderly comforting his daughter. The sight left many speechless. But not everyone was happy seeing that scene. On a nearby street, an old car sat silently parked. Margaret was in the back seat, her eyes narrowed as she watched from afar. She clenched her teeth and muttered through them, "That girl still lives happily. I can't stand it." Vivian sat in the front, her red lips pressed tight. She didn't take her eyes off Jeremy holding Taylor as they walked into the house. A text message was quickly sent from the phone in her hand. "Get ready. The time is near." That night, Taylor played in the garden behind the mansion. The soft yellow garden lights glowed warmly over the grass. Maria spread out a blanket and sat with her, occasionally showing the girl how to make flower crowns with white daisies. Taylor giggled, running happily, her small hands picking flowers and handing them to Maria. "For you, you have to smile more, okay?" Maria hugged her tightly, her voice breaking. "My sweet little girl." Just then, the garden lights went out. The entire yard sank into thick darkness. Maria froze and turned her head. The roar of a car engine thundered outside the gate. "Taylor, come here!" she screamed, pulling the child into her arms. But 2 dark figures rushed in from the fence. A rough hand ripped Taylor away from Maria's grasp. "No, let her go!" Maria screamed, clawing desperately, but it was hopeless. Taylor's shrill cries pierced the night. "Daddy, help me!" In a flash, the gate swung open. The car sped off, its tires screeching against the pavement. Maria collapsed onto the grass, her hands trembling, tears streaming down her face. She screamed until her voice went hoarse, but only the cold night wind answered back. In his study, Jeremy had just closed a file when he heard the frantic screaming. He bolted out, his heart pounding out of his chest. "Where is Taylor?" he roared, racing into the yard. Maria was kneeling on the ground, sobbing, her voice broken. "Someone took her. They drove off, Jeremy." Jeremy was stunned, as if struck by a hammer to the head. He dashed to the gate, scanning the dark street. But only the night and emptiness remained. "No, Taylor, my baby," he whispered, his voice cracking. The phone in his pocket vibrated violently. He pulled it out, his hand shaking, the screen flashing an unknown number. He answered, nearly shouting. "Who is this?" On the other end, a familiar female voice cut through, cold as steel. "Jeremy, if you want to see your daughter again, sign over all the property deeds and company shares. If not, you'll never see her again." Vivian's voice. Jeremy froze. He gripped the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. His eyes burned red, his heart clenched tight, as if a new nightmare had just begun. Once again, darkness swallowed his life and his daughter's. The phone slipped from Jeremy's trembling hand and hit the desk with a harsh thud. He stood frozen, his heartbeat hammering as if it might burst. Never had he felt this powerless. Vivian's cold words still echoed in his head. "Sign over everything, or you will never see your daughter again." Maria rushed in from the hallway, her face streaked with tears. She gripped his sleeve, her voice shaking. "Jeremy, did they call you?" "Taylor, where is she?" He spun around, his eyes blazing red. "Vivian has Taylor. She wants me to sign the entire company over in exchange for her." Maria staggered back, covering her face as sobs tore out of her. Linda, the nurse who had stayed behind after Taylor's disappearance, rushed downstairs, her wide eyes filled with horror. "My God, how could they do this to a 6-year-old child?" Jeremy didn't answer. He paced the room, clawing at his tie as though he could rip his chest open. Rage, helplessness, and fear collided in a storm that screamed inside his mind. Elsewhere, In a damp warehouse on the edge of town, Taylor sat bound to a splintered wooden chair. The rope cut into her wrists until they bled. The stench of mildew and rust filled her lungs and made her cough. Yet she clutched her torn, faded teddy bear tightly against her chest, clinging to the only comfort she had left. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Daddy, I'm so scared, but I know you'll come. Please, Daddy." The iron door screeched open, flooding the darkness with a sliver of light. A tall, slender figure stepped inside. Vivian appeared in a deep crimson dress, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Crying won't save you, Taylor." Her voice dripped with false sweetness. "Your father will kneel, and you're nothing but the tool that will make it happen." Taylor shrank back, hugging her teddy tighter, her big eyes glistening with tears. Margaret followed close behind, her arms crossed, a bitter smirk tugging at her lips. This child? There's nothing special about her. A weak, useless little girl. And yet, she's enough to shake an entire empire, enough to make the mighty Coleman name tremble. Pathetic. Vivian shot her mother a glance, then bent down, whispering close to Taylor's ear. "Remember this. The moment your father signs, you'll walk free. But if he doesn't, you will never see the sky again." Taylor broke into sobs, biting her lip to keep the sound inside. She refused to let them see her weakness. Back at the mansion, Jeremy sat motionless. The phone buzzed again. He snatched it up, his voice hoarse. "Vivian, what do you want?" A chilling laugh hissed through the receiver. "What do I want? Everything. The shares, the fortune, that car company you're so proud of. Sign it all away, Jeremy. Sign it, and you'll get your daughter back." Jeremy's grip tightened until his knuckles turned white. His voice shook with fury. "If you lay a finger on Taylor, I swear I will destroy you, Vivian." Vivian laughed, drawing out the sound like a blade. "You still think threats mean something? Not this time. This time, you're the weak one. Don't forget, the little girl is in my hands." The line went dead. Jeremy hurled the phone to the floor, the screen shattering. He braced himself against the desk, head bowed, his whole body trembling. Inside him, two forces clashed: his terror of losing his daughter and the savage anger that threatened to consume him. "Money, the company, none of it matters," he whispered through a strangled voice. "Taylor, you are everything to me." Maria stepped closer, laying a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Jeremy, we have to call the police. You can't face them alone." Jeremy raised his head, his bloodshot eyes burning with resolve. "You're right. I'll call them. But Maria, if they hurt Taylor, I swear, even if it costs me my life, I will bring her back." Maria broke down in tears, nodding. Linda stood nearby, her own eyes brimming. In that moment, they all understood Jeremy was no longer the cold millionaire they knew, but a desperate father ready to give everything for his child. At the same time, in the warehouse, Taylor clutched her teddy bear and whispered, "Daddy, I know you'll come. I believe in you." Her eyes glowed with a fragile but unyielding light, a candle in the dark refusing to be snuffed out. Late that night, the city police knocked on the mansion door. A tall, broad-shouldered inspector with a stern face introduced himself as Robert Miller. He shook Jeremy's hand, his voice firm. "We've received the report, Mr. Coleman. Trust that we'll do everything we can, but we need your full cooperation. Do not sign anything. Stall them. Give us time to trace their moves." Jeremy nodded, staring straight into his eyes. "I understand, but I will not just sit here. Even if it kills me, I will bring her back." His hoarse, unyielding words echoed through the room, sealing themselves as a vow carved in stone. The rain poured down as if it wanted to rip the sky apart. Jeremy gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes locked on the dark road stretching endlessly ahead. In the passenger seat, Detective Robert Miller adjusted the radio, his deep, gravelly voice cutting through the static. "Team 1, Team 2, you are in position. Surround the entire area. Wait for the signal." The car sped through the rain like an arrow. Jeremy didn't say a word, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Only one thought echoed in his mind. Where is Taylor? Is she cold? Is she crying out of fear? Robert glanced at him, speaking calmly. "Mr. Coleman, I know you're anxious, but remember, any rash move could put the girl in danger. We stick to the plan, understood?" Jeremy gave a small nod, but his heart still burned like fire. The silhouette of a warehouse appeared faintly through the curtain of rain. Darkness swallowed it, except for a flickering yellow light leaking through a small window. Inside, Taylor was tied to a wooden chair. The rough rope dug into her wrists, cutting into the skin until blood seeped out. She trembled, clutching her old, ragged teddy bear to her chest, whispering softly, "Daddy, I'm here. I know you'll find me." The iron door creaked open. Vivian stepped inside, tall and thin, her wet hair clinging to her face, her red lips curling into a mocking smile. She threw a stack of papers down in front of Jeremy when he was brought in. "Sign it, Jeremy!" Her voice was cold as ice. "Every asset, every share, the company. Just one signature, and you'll have your daughter back." Margaret folded her arms and laughed with scorn. "And you still think you're strong? Everything you built will belong to someone else, and we'll crush it beneath our feet." Stephen, dressed in a dark suit, gripped a gleaming knife as he stepped forward. His eyes blazed, his voice hoarse. "Don't stall. Sign now, or blood will spill right here." Jeremy looked at his daughter. Taylor shook violently, tears streaming down her face, yet her eyes still shone, carrying absolute faith in her father. He drew a deep breath and picked up the pen. His large hand trembled, dragging each stroke slowly, as if trying to buy more time. Stephen growled, stepping closer. "Hurry up, I don't have patience." Vivian lifted her hand to stop him. "Let him finish signing, then it will all be over." Outside, the rain fell in sheets, drowning out the sound of police boots quietly closing in. Robert Miller signaled his team, his eyes tight as a drawn bowstring. "Wait." As soon as he grabs the girl, "Open fire and take control." Inside the warehouse, Jeremy paused at the final line. He looked up, his voice deep and raspy. "Now release Taylor." Vivian let out a cruel laugh. "Naive, Jeremy. Did you really think it would be that easy? You've already lost everything." Stephen lunged forward, knife raised high. In that instant, Jeremy slammed the pen down and threw himself around Taylor, pulling her into his arms and twisting his body to shield her. "No!" he roared. The knife slashed across his shoulder, tearing his shirt. Taylor screamed, but buried her face in her father's neck just in time. Gunshots thundered. The warehouse door burst open. Flashlights blazed through the darkness, accompanied by a commanding shout. "Police, drop your weapons!" Stephen staggered, knocked to the ground, his knife skidding away. Two officers tackled him, wrenching his arms behind his back and snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Vivian shrieked, clutching her head. "No, this can't be. I can't lose like this," Margaret screamed, pointing at Jeremy. "This is all your fault. You ruined my life." Amid the deafening rain and blaring sirens outside, Jeremy sank to his knees, clutching Taylor tightly. She shook in his arms, her small hands clinging around his neck, her voice breaking through sobs. "Daddy, I thought I'd never see you again." Jeremy pulled her close, kissing her soaked hair. "I'm here, Taylor, and I'll never let anyone take you away again." His eyes blurred with rain and tears. In his arms, Taylor was small but warm, the only reason he needed to keep standing. The police dragged Stephen outside, his hands bound, his face twisted in hatred as he glared back one last time. Vivian screamed in despair as she was pulled away, her voice hoarse in the storm. "I'd rather die than lose like this." Margaret hung her head, mumbling curses under her breath. Robert Miller stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Jeremy's shoulder. "You did the hardest part. Now let us handle the rest." Jeremy nodded, hugging his daughter tighter, as if he would never let her go again. The storm raged on, but in his arms, the small light he had fought for had finally returned. The morning after the rain, the city sky wore a pale shade of blue veiled with mist. Jeremy stood still in the living room, his hand tightening around a cup of cold coffee. On the sofa, Taylor was still asleep after a long night of panic. Each steady breath from her eased his heart a little, but the memory of last night cut like a knife, refusing to fade. A knock sounded at the door. Robert Miller walked in, holding a thick file in his hand. His face, as always, was stern and composed. He set the file on the table and looked directly at Jeremy. "We've gathered enough evidence. The case will be brought to trial next month. You should prepare yourself. This isn't only a battle for the police and the court, but also a battle of spirit for you and your daughter." Jeremy sat down, his eyes bloodshot, but his voice was firm. "I don't care what I have to face. I just want Taylor to have a peaceful life again. Justice must be served." A month later, the city courthouse was packed. Footsteps echoed through the hallway. Camera flashes flickered nonstop. This was no longer a private case. It had become an event that stirred the whole city. Vivian entered the courtroom, her face pale, her hair disheveled. She wore a gray prison uniform, her eyes still burning with hatred. Margaret followed, her thin frame trembling with each step, yet she refused to let go of her hostile glare. Stephen was escorted in, his once expensive suits replaced with a glaring orange jumpsuit, his face twisted with scorn, his eyes wild. At the prosecution's bench, two new faces also kept their heads bowed. Cheryl, the toxic friend who once pushed Vivian on, and Dr. Reynolds, the man who had supplied the forged papers. Both now sat under the weight of public contempt. Reynolds, stripped of his white coat, was nothing more than a fallen man, stripped of every ounce of authority. Jeremy sat in the lower row, his hand gripping Taylor's. She wore a simple white dress, her hair neatly tied back, her face pale but her eyes clear and resolute. Maria sat beside her, gently patting her shoulder, whispering, "It's going to be all right, sweetheart. We'll get through this." The judge struck the gavel, his voice firm. The trial of the defendants, Vivian Carter, Margaret Lewis, Stephen Grant, and accomplices begins. The defendants are charged with kidnapping, extortion, fraud, and conspiracy. The prosecutor rose, presenting the evidence one by one: the recording of threatening phone calls to Jeremy, the security camera footage around the warehouse, Maria's testimony, and the statements of employees manipulated by Stephen. Every piece was like a knife, cutting straight into their crimes. Vivian sat still, her hands trembling. Margaret was drenched in sweat, mumbling prayers. Stephen clenched his teeth, his eyes reckless but hopeless. Cheryl lowered her face, tears streaming down. Reynolds bowed his head, exhaling like a man who had just awakened from a dream of power. When Taylor was called to the witness stand, the entire courtroom fell silent. The little girl stepped forward, clutching her old teddy bear tightly. Her voice was small and shaky, but clear. "I didn't do anything wrong, but they made me cry every day. I just wanted to be with my dad." The courtroom froze in silence. Jeremy lowered his head, his broad shoulders trembling. He had never seen his little daughter so fragile, yet so brave. After 3 days of hearings, the judge delivered the verdict: Vivian Carter, 25 years in prison; Margaret Lewis, 20 years; Stephen Grant, 30 years. Cheryl Mason and Dr. Reynolds are stripped of all positions, banned from practicing, with suspended sentences and administrative fines. The gavel struck again, echoing across the chamber. Vivian screamed, lunging toward Jeremy, her voice filled with despair. "You destroyed me! Jeremy, you will regret this." But no one pitied her. The police dragged her away as her shrieks filled the air. Margaret kept her head down, her arrogance gone. Stephen bit his lip, silent, like a man who had lost everything. Cheryl and Reynolds walked out quietly, their backs bent, knowing their reputations were finished. After the trial, Jeremy began the journey of healing with his daughter. He took Taylor to see Dr. Harriet Collins, a young psychologist with a gentle smile. Harriet handed Taylor a box of crayons and encouraged her to draw. Taylor stayed quiet for a while, then drew a house with 2 figures beside it, one tall, one small. She smiled and whispered, "This is me and my dad." Harriet nodded. "You've found your safe place again." Jeremy sat beside her, speechless. He realized that all those years, he had let work consume him, forgetting that the true legacy of his life was his little girl. In the days that followed, Jeremy changed completely. In the mornings, he took Taylor to school. In the afternoons, they ate dinner together, did homework, and read books side by side. He listened to every small story she told, something he had never been patient enough to do before. One afternoon, he took her to the auto workshop. Instead of showing off new car models, he placed a blank design sheet on the table and handed her some crayons. "Go ahead and draw here. This is the real legacy. Not the company, but you." Taylor laughed, busily drawing flowers, clouds, and her teddy bear. Jeremy watched, his heart overflowing, his eyes misting with tears. On the weekend, in the villa garden, Jeremy and Taylor planted flowers together. The fresh soil smelled of life, the morning sunlight shining down. Taylor eagerly dug into the earth, her small hands dirty, but her smile radiant. When the last flower was planted, Taylor flopped down on the grass, resting her head on her father's shoulder. She whispered softly, like the wind, "Daddy, all I need is you." Jeremy wrapped his arms around her, his voice choked, "And I will never let you cry again." A tear fell. But this time it was not from sorrow. It was a tear of happiness, closing a dark chapter and opening a new dawn for father and daughter. Many years had passed since that historic trial. The city was still bustling, but inside the Coleman mansion, the atmosphere was different. There were no more shouts, no more angry footsteps, only the giggles of a little girl growing up in love. Taylor was now 8 years old. She had grown a little taller. Her once chubby cheeks were slimmer, but her eyes remained as bright as ever. On the bookshelf, new dolls stood neatly beside her old teddy bear. Though its fur was worn, the teddy was still the friend Taylor could not part with. One late weekend afternoon, Jeremy set aside his files and stepped into the garden, where Taylor was stringing daisies into small rings. He quietly sat down next to her, his voice gentle as the breeze. "Taylor, do you want me to tell you about the first time I learned to drive?" The girl looked up, her eyes shining. "Yes, but you have to tell me everything. I want to know if you were as nervous as I was when I learned to ride a bike." Jeremy laughed, ruffling his daughter's hair. "I was more nervous than you. Back then, my palms were sweaty and my heart was pounding. But then I thought, if I don't get through this, I'll be walking my whole life. So I hit the gas and nearly drove straight into a ditch." Taylor burst out laughing and leaned her head against his shoulder. "You really are silly, but I love hearing stories about when you were little." That evening, in the living room, father and daughter spread Lego pieces across the floor. Jeremy clumsily connected the wrong parts, and Taylor frowned as she fixed them, scolding him with affection. "You messed it up. This piece goes here." Jeremy pretended to be puzzled. "Oh, I thought. Never mind, you're the chief engineer. I'm just the assistant." Taylor nodded seriously. "All right, but the assistant has to work hard too, and not leave everything unfinished to go to work all the time like before." Her words made Jeremy pause. He looked at his daughter, then nodded firmly. "Yes, I promise. No matter how important work is, nothing is more important than you." During the summer, Jeremy took Taylor to the car factory. But this time, he didn't lead her to the noisy production line. Instead, he let her sit in the design room. In front of her was a blank sheet of paper, colored pencils, and an unfinished car model. "Taylor," he said, "draw whatever you like. Who knows, maybe one day a Coleman Motors car will have your designs on it." The little girl smiled and began drawing flowers on the car's body, adding clouds and a sundae. When he saw the result, Jeremy pulled her into his arms. His voice choked. "This is the real legacy. Not the company, but you, Taylor. You are the greatest pride of my life." In the quiet evenings, father and daughter read books together. Taylor rested her head on his lap, her eyes closing as she listened to Jeremy's steady, warm voice reading a fairy tale. His tone was calm and soothing, far from the tense meetings of the boardroom. Before drifting into sleep, Taylor whispered, "Daddy, when I grow up, I still want to sit and listen to you read. Promise me you won't ever leave me alone?" Jeremy bent down and kissed her forehead, his voice trembling but certain. "I promise. You are my only light, Taylor." That spring, the mansion's garden bloomed with brilliant colors. Father and daughter planted new rose bushes. Taylor happily placed each seedling in the soil, while Jeremy carefully pressed the roots down and watered them. When the work was done, Taylor wiped the sweat from her forehead and leaned her head on his shoulder. The afternoon sun fell softly, warm and tender. "Daddy," she whispered, All I need is you." Jeremy held her tightly, his eyes blurring with tears. In that moment, he knew that all the losses, all the storms no longer mattered, because right beside him, Taylor was still here. Her smile was a new dawn, the greatest reward life had ever given him. At the end, darkness could never swallow the light. This story has shown us a truth that never changes. The wicked will always face retribution, while the good will always be rewarded. Vivian, Margaret, and their accomplices thought they could use deceit to take everything, yet they were still punished by the law. On the other hand, Taylor, the innocent and pure little girl, finally came to live in the true love of her father. The noble message of this story is that sometimes money and fame are not everything. The most precious thing, the real legacy of every person, is the love and protection we give to those we hold dear. And now, I want to hear your thoughts, my dear audience of Story 4 Heart. What do you think about the father's actions in this story? If you were in his place, would you choose the company or your daughter? Do you believe that justice always stands with kind-hearted souls? I also want to ask you something personal. How has life been for you lately? Are there any struggles you are carrying alone? If you wish, please share with us in the comments. Story 4 Heart does not only tell heartwarming stories, touching stories, but also hopes to listen, walk alongside you, and share with you. So, don't forget to leave a comment. Let me know where you are watching from, how you feel, and remember to hit follow so we can continue this journey together through many more meaningful stories. A 6-year-old girl was dragged straight into the yard by her stepmother and her lover right after returning from the funeral, then had a bucket of water poured over her head under the excuse of washing away bad luck. She clutched her teddy bear tightly, her small legs trembling in front of the house. Suddenly, a luxury car stopped abruptly outside. A wealthy man stepped out, draped his coat over the girl's shoulders, and spoke only one sentence that opened the confrontation in which the wicked would be forced to pay the price. Before we begin, please leave a comment with your thoughts about this story and give us a score from 1 to 10. Are you doing okay today? If there is anything on your mind that you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. Wishing you a few quiet, heartfelt moments as you follow this healing story along the journey of courage and justice. The wooden door closed behind the group that had just returned from the cemetery. The house was so quiet that the ticking of the wall clock sounded like a heavy hammer falling. Emma Collins, 6 years old, clutched a worn-out teddy bear tightly to her chest, her eyes red and swollen. That bear was the last gift her mother had given her before dying in a car accident years ago. And now, her father, Richard Collins, a successful businessman and a loving father, had just passed away after a long illness. Inside the vast house, Emma suddenly felt so small it was suffocating. Karen Collins, 35, the woman who had entered this house only 2 years ago as a stepmother, had spent the morning at the cemetery pretending to sob and wiping her tears endlessly. But the moment the door closed, her face changed completely. Cold and sharp, her eyes turned on Emma without the slightest trace of compassion, as though she were looking at an irritating obstacle. Emma whispered, her voice trembling, Can I clean the house for you, Mom?" Karen turned, let out a bitter laugh, and snapped with a tone dripping with arrogance. "From now on, I'm the lady of this house, the one who makes the decisions. Don't you dare act innocent just to win my pity." Emma froze in place, hugging the bear tighter, her little fingers digging into the frayed fabric. At that moment, the door opened. A man stepped inside, dragging a suitcase that he dropped heavily on the floor. It was Robert Hayes, 38, Richard's younger brother. In the eyes of many, Robert had long been nothing more than a spoiled man who lived in the shadow of his brother. Yet today, he walked in with confidence, as if this house had always belonged to him. Robert dropped into a chair, twisted open a bottle of whiskey already sitting on the table, and took a long swig. Then he looked Emma up and down and spat on the floor. "Hello, Emma. From now on, I'll be here, taking the place of your useless father." Emma gasped and stepped back, stammering, "Uncle, why are you in my dad's house?" "This is my dad's house." Karen turned to her, her voice sharp and vicious, every word striking like a slap across the child's face. "Your father is dead. Do you understand that? In this house, I'm the one who decides, and my man now is Robert." From this moment on, you have no right to speak in this house. Either keep your mouth shut or get out." Emma stood stunned, tears welling in her eyes. Robert let out a contemptuous laugh, his shrill voice dripping with mockery. "Look at you, just a pathetic little freeloader who can't do anything except cry and cling to that ragged teddy bear. Your father was a fool for spoiling you, and now you think you're some kind of princess, more like a ruined one. In this house, you're nothing but an eyesore, a burden everyone wishes to throw out." Emma trembled, clutching her teddy bear tighter. I'll be good. I won't be a bother." Karen suddenly shot to her feet, her eyes flashing with cruelty. She grabbed Emma's arm and snatched up the small suitcase already packed with a few worn clothes. The teddy bear was ripped from Emma's grasp and flung into the yard. Karen stormed out, carrying a bucket of cold water. "Get out of my house. I'm sick of pretending to be your kind-hearted mother, you troublesome little brat. Your father died, your mother died, all because of you. I need to wash away the filth you bring, you cursed child. Just looking at you makes my skin crawl, let alone having you live under the same roof." Emma gasped in panic. "No, Mom, please. I'm so cold. I promise I'll be good. I won't talk anymore." Karen clenched her teeth. "You're not my blood. Don't you dare call me Mom. I'll never accept a worthless parasite like you. I don't want to see your face in this house for one more second. Get out." She hurled the bucket of cold water straight onto Emma. The water drenched her hair and clothes, soaking into her skin until she shivered uncontrollably. The teddy bear lay sodden on the ground, crushed beneath Robert's shoe as he crossed his arms and sneered. "Look at that. No different from a stray puppy. Perfectly fitting for her." Emma clasped her hands together, eyes wide with desperate pleading, searching for help. A few neighbors stood at a distance, but as soon as her gaze met theirs, they quickly shut their doors and turned away. No one dared to intervene. Emma collapsed to the ground, clutching the ruined teddy bear, her tears mixing with the icy water on her cheeks. Her hoarse voice broke through the night. "Daddy, where am I supposed to go now?" At that moment, the sound of an engine echoed. A sleek Cadillac pulled up right outside the gate. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He wore a dark suit, his eyes sharp yet filled with shock. He froze, staring at the scene beyond the gate. A 6-year-old girl curled up in the yard, soaked to the bone, her eyes red, clutching an old toy as if it were her last lifeline. His gaze betrayed a pain he could not hide. The man clenched his fist, and in that instant, the memories of his own abandoned childhood rushed back. He took a step forward, his voice hoarse with emotion. "What is going on here?" The man was Ethan Collins, 40 years old, a self-made millionaire often mentioned in financial magazines such as Forbes, Fortune, and the New York Times. He had built a real estate empire spanning multiple states, known as a cold strategist in business, yet secretive about his private life. Few knew that behind that glamorous image, he carried a wounded childhood, abandoned, once living in fear of his stepfather's violence and his own mother's neglect. The gate swung open, and Ethan Collins stepped into the rain-soaked courtyard, frozen in place. His dark suit jacket shifted lightly in the wind as he moved forward. His sharp face, his eyes still stunned at the sight of a little girl soaked with cold water, shivering in the middle of the yard. Ethan slowly removed his coat and draped it over Emma's shoulders. The small frame beneath trembled under the warmth still lingering in the fabric. Emma looked up, her tear-stained eyes flickering with a fragile hope. Her tiny hand clutched the edge of his coat as if afraid he might vanish. Ethan tightened his grip gently on her shoulder, then raised his head. His voice came out hoarse, each word pressed down with restrained anger. "Richard has been gone for less than a day. Is this how you treat his daughter?" Karen blinked, her shoulders trembling slightly. A single false tear rolled down her cheek. Her voice quivered, though it carried an icy edge. "You misunderstood, Ethan. I only wanted to teach her to listen, to behave politely. The girl is stubborn, disrespectful to her uncle. I was only scaring her a little." Robert let out a mocking laugh and blew cigarette smoke in his direction. "I'm her uncle. I suggest you stop meddling in family matters. You already showed up late to the funeral, and now you want to play the hero? This is none of your business, so stay out of it." A cold flash flickered in Ethan's eyes. Memories surged in his mind. At 15, it was Richard, the very friend now lying in the ground, who pulled him out of nights, filled with beatings, out from under the table where he hid from his stepfather's blows. Richard had given him shelter, a real friendship. And now, standing before this scene, Ethan knew it was time to repay that debt. Emma tugged at his sleeve, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. "Uncle, they'll throw me out again. I have nowhere else to go. Please, help me." Ethan looked down at her. In that moment, the fear in Emma's young eyes was the same terror he once carried in his own. He drew a deep breath, then turned back to face Karen and Robert. "She's coming with me," he said firmly, leaving no space for argument. Karen tilted her head, her eyes glinting with malice. She was about to protest, but Robert placed his hand on her elbow and lowered his voice with a mocking laugh. "Let him take her. That little brat will come crawling back, sooner or later." Karen froze, swallowing her anger. Forcing a crooked smile, she muttered through clenched teeth, "Fine. If you want to play the hero, go ahead. Let's see how long you can carry her. She's nothing but a jinx." Ethan didn't respond. He simply bent down, lifted Emma into his arms, and walked straight out through the gate. A sleek Cadillac Escalade was already waiting, its door opening and closing softly behind them. Inside the car, Emma sat pressed against the seat, her small hand clutching an old teddy bear. Her wide eyes shimmered with worry before she whispered, her voice barely louder than a breath. "Sir, are you going to leave me too, like my stepmother did?" Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning pale. Outside, the rows of trees blurred and slipped away. Inside his chest, old memories stirred nights when he sat shivering by a window, waiting for a hand to lift him up, a hand that never came. He swallowed hard, his gaze fixed firmly on the road ahead. Not a single word left his lips. Only the steady hum of the engine filled the silence, and the tension in his hands trembled so strongly that Emma could feel it. The car surged into the darkness, carrying with it a question left unanswered. In Emma's heart, the fear had not yet eased. In Ethan's eyes, past and present collided, signaling a journey whose ending was still unwritten. The car turned into the underground garage. Ethan parked in his reserved spot, cut the engine, and leaned over to open the door for Emma. He placed his warm hand on her shoulder, signaling her to follow. They walked through the lobby where the doorman, Mr. Harris, gave a slight nod. He was in his 50s, quiet and polite. His eyes fell on Emma's soaked clothes, and he looked as if he might ask something, but he held back when he met Ethan's stern gaze. The elevator doors opened. They stood side by side. Emma clutched her wet teddy bear, her eyes fixed on the tips of her shoes. When the doors slid open again, a carpeted hallway led them to the corner apartment. Ethan swiped his card, the light blinked, and the door unlocked. Inside, the penthouse was spacious, with an open kitchen and airy living room, everything neat and orderly. Yet the silence was so complete that the sound of breathing seemed loud. Ethan handed Emma a soft towel and pointed to the chair. "Sit here for a moment, I'll get you something dry." Emma gave a small nod. He brought her a little sweater and sweatpants, then pointed to the bathroom. When she came out, her hair had been lightly dried, the oversized sweater swallowing her frame, making her look even smaller. Ethan warmed a pot of chicken soup, ladled it into a bowl, and placed a spoon beside it. The gentle warmth spread through the air. Emma looked at it, then pushed the bowl back. "I'll only eat a little. I don't want to get yelled at." Ethan went quiet for a few seconds. He pulled out a chair across from her, his voice slow and steady. "Here, you don't have to ask permission just to exist." Emma blinked at him, as if waiting for a condition to follow. "You eat when you're hungry, you sleep when you're tired. No one will scold you for that." She picked up the spoon, scooped a small bite, and blew on it gently. She ate slowly, stealing glances at him between each spoonful. Ethan didn't rush her. He just sat there with his hands folded, as if waiting for her breathing to settle into a calmer rhythm. When the bowl was halfway empty, Emma set the spoon down. "You don't hate me, do you?" Ethan answered after a pause. "No one has the right to hate a child for simply existing." Emma lowered her head, her voice thinning. "They said I was bad luck. You are Richard's daughter, and you are yourself. No one can define you by their cruelty." He stood, took a thin blanket, and draped it over her legs, then quietly tidied up. The clink of dishes was barely audible. Emma whispered, "I won't make the house dirty." Ethan turned back, offering a faint smile. "A house is meant to be lived in. It's not a showroom. Here, you're allowed to make a little mess." Night settled in. Ethan led Emma into the small guest bedroom. The bed was already made. He set a moon-shaped night lamp on the side table and handed her a glass of water. "Do you want to call anyone?" Emma shook her head. She clutched her teddy bear and slipped under the blanket. Her eyes stung, but she forced herself to hold it in. After a while, a tiny sob escaped, no louder than the wind. "Mom, Dad, why did you leave me with them?" Ethan sat outside the door, his back against the wall, his hands clasped together. He didn't knock, didn't intrude. He only listened. The sobs inside grew quieter, breaking off in uneven bursts until they faded completely. His eyes were red. Old fragments of memory stirred painfully. A little boy once counted the steps of a drunken man in the hallway, swallowing his own cries so he wouldn't be discovered. Richard had pulled that boy out of that place, given him something steady to hold on to. Ethan looked at the half-closed door and told himself he would not let history repeat itself. He went back to the kitchen, brewed a cup of tea, sat at the table, and opened his laptop. He typed out a short email to Attorney Anderson, then made a list of what needed to be done the next morning. Confirm the legal status of temporary guardianship, contact Emma's school, arrange a child psychologist, and make the unavoidable call to Karen. Everything had to follow the right order. Not rushed, but not delayed either. He turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the hallway lamp. Returning to sit in front of the bedroom door, he closed his eyes for a few minutes. There was no sound except the steady breathing of a child who had just endured a day far too long. In the quiet, a faint sound came from beneath the blanket. Emma shifted. Her stuffed bear slipped from her hand and knocked gently against the bed frame. From deep inside its worn cotton filling, a fragile clicking noise like metal brushing against metal flickered out, then vanished. Emma was asleep. Ethan didn't hear it. The apartment sank back into silence, as if holding on to a secret not yet ready to be revealed. In the morning, Ethan quietly pushed open the living room door and cleared the bowls and spoons left on the table. He heard the faint creak of a bed, then Emma's bare footsteps. The girl hugged her teddy bear, folding the blanket neatly out of habit from her old home. Emma set the bear down, and by chance noticed a small loose seam on its ear. She tugged at it. A thin piece of fabric pulled away, revealing something hard stuck inside. Emma slipped her finger in and pulled out a silver USB stick, no bigger than her fingertip. She looked up, her eyes wide. "Uncle Ethan, the bear is torn, and there's this." Ethan stopped what he was doing and came over. He took the USB from her, looked at Emma, and asked, "Do you want to see together what's inside?" Emma gave a small nod, still clutching the teddy bear tight against her chest. Ethan opened the laptop on the kitchen table. He plugged in the USB, and the screen showed a single audio file, named with a date from 1 year ago. He clicked play. From the speakers, Richard's voice came through, shaky but clear. "Robert, what is this bottle of medicine? I don't need this. When I take it, my heart races. Karen, where did you get this?" Robert's voice answered, cold and flat. "The doctor prescribed it. Take it. You're weak. Don't be paranoid." There was a thin stretch of silence. Then Karen's voice slid in, whispering close to the device. "Let him drink more. Let him die already." Ethan pressed his hand against the edge of the table. Emma blinked fast, then broke into sobs, the question spilling out as if she could no longer hold it back. They poisoned my dad?" Ethan placed his hand gently over the back of hers. He kept his voice low, steady, and firm. "Your father didn't want you to live in fear. He left you the truth." Emma squeezed the bear, her tears soaking into its fur. "Dad knew what they were doing to him? Maybe your father knew he wouldn't survive. He understood what was happening, and he believed someone would protect you and preserve this evidence. Today, that's what I'll do. I'll expose every one of those vile people." Ethan rewound a few sections, listening carefully to the breathing, the clink of a glass, the scrape of a chair. He opened the file properties, took a screenshot, and saved 2 backup copies. one to the hard drive and one to the cloud. His movements were precise, not a second wasted. Uncle Ethan, if they find out about this, they'll take the USB back, won't they? No one can take it anymore. Ethan's gaze was steady, his voice low. Not even them. He pulled out his phone and dialed a middle-aged man. When the voice answered on the other end, Ethan said briefly, "Anderson, this is Ethan. I need you today. There's audio evidence connected to poisoning and a family dispute." Professor William Anderson was a law professor and an attorney specializing in finance and family matters in New York. He had advised Ethan in several difficult transactions and was known for his meticulousness. On the line, Anderson spoke calmly. "Keep everything as it is. Do not send anything through messages. I will come over. And Ethan, stay calm. Protect the child first." Ethan hung up, then bent down to meet Emma's eyes. "This morning, we are going to have a proper breakfast. After that, a trusted uncle will come to see you. He doesn't talk much, but he always stands on the side of the truth." Emma gave a slight nod. "Uncle, if Dad were still alive, would he be happy that I found this?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Your father would be proud that you were brave enough to face the truth." He placed the USB drive into a shock-proof pouch, stored it in the mini safe in his office, locked it, then sent a short message to Anderson. "Saved 3 copies, 1 offline." Emma wiped her tears with the sleeve of her shirt. She took a deep breath and whispered to her teddy bear, "Mom, I found what Dad left behind. I will hold it tight." Inside Ethan, determination rose tall like a pillar. At first, he had only intended to repay Richard, but from the moment he heard Karen's whisper, he knew this was no longer about gratitude. This was responsibility. Emma was a smaller version of himself as a child, one who had been stripped of a rightful place. He was going to give it back to her. At the same time, in a rented apartment, Karen slammed the newspaper down on the glass table. The news from the night before read, "Millionaire Ethan Collins takes the Collins daughter out of the house." She dug her nails into the edge of the table, her voice hissing through her teeth. "He is challenging me." Robert lit a cigarette, leaned back, and smirked. "Calm down. Don't cry like that in front of the press again. They can see the fakery. You think I don't know that? The girl is with him, and she still holds shares in the company." Karen spun around. "I will sue him for kidnapping. I will say he is exploiting her to seize the assets." Robert exhaled smoke, his eyes narrowing. "Then sue him. But you must drag her back at all costs. If she stays out of reach, our plan will collapse." He lowered his head and spoke softly, as if sealing an unspoken order. "The girl holds company shares. She must be brought back at all costs. Otherwise, our plan will collapse." That afternoon, Ethan's phone would not stop buzzing. His inbox flooded with new alerts, articles, short news flashes, online comments. A picture of Karen standing in front of the house appeared everywhere, her eyes red, clutching a black and white portrait of Richard. The headline scrolled across the screen, "Millionaire Ethan Collins removes child from home to seize assets." Ethan shut off the screen. He poured Emma a glass of warm milk and said quietly, "Finish this, then we're going to the library." Emma nodded, hugging her teddy bear tight, the wary look in her eyes refusing to fade. They walked into the lobby of the public library. The space was hushed, footsteps soft against the floor. At the information desk, a young woman looked up and offered a gentle smile. She was in her mid-20s, hair neatly tied back, a name tag clipped to her sweater. Emily Carter, librarian in charge of digital archives and public records. Her voice was steady and clear. "How can I help you and your little one today?" Ethan set a thin folder on the desk, a copy of the will, stock registration papers, Richard's treatment schedule. "We need to cross-check these. Authenticity, dates, and any irregularities." Emily glanced at the documents, then extended her hand toward Emma. "Hello there. My name is Emily. I'll help you find the right answers." Emma took her hand lightly. Emily turned to her computer, accessing corporate databases, electronic registries, and the hospital's public records. Her clicks were precise. Then her eyes froze on a detail. "Here," she said, swiveling the screen so they could both see. The stock transfer agreement is dated March 14th. Ethan stiffened. The day Richard was admitted to the hospital for the second time. Emily nodded. The hospital records confirm he was under sedation for 48 hours. The signature on this contract could not have been his unless someone else signed it. She printed 2 copies, clipped them, and marked the time discrepancy with a red pen. I'll create a comparison table, contract dates, hospital entry logs, and Richard's older signature samples. The inconsistency here is significant. Emma's voice was a whisper. Do you believe me? I'm not lying. They hate me. Emily met her eyes. I believe you. And I'll help. Ethan exhaled slowly, placing his hand on Emma's shoulder like an anchor. He turned back to Emily. Thank you. If there are copying fees or record access charges, put them on me. Emily shook her head. Public records are every citizen's right. I'm just doing my job. She paused, then lowered her voice. But you should brace yourself for another media strike. I've already seen a second article going up on the local news site. They're telling the story their way. A message from Professor William Anderson came through at that moment. Keep Emma close. I've filed for a temporary child protection order and notified family court. Prepare duplicates of all evidence. Ethan replied. We have audio recordings. There are signs of contract forgery. Meeting this afternoon. They moved to the scanning station. Emily guided Emma's small hands to place the papers on the glass and press the button. You're doing great. Emma gave the faintest smile. For the first time that day, her eyes relaxed. Ethan seized the moment to make a quick call to his office. I need the legal team to prepare a comparative report on Richard's signatures from 2019 through 2023. Urgent. The phone rang again. It was an unknown number. A woman's voice introduced herself as a reporter. We want to ask about the kidnapping allegations. Ethan kept his tone calm. I will release a statement once the court issues a temporary ruling. I will not respond outside the legal framework. He hung up, not allowing the next question to spill through the speaker. Emily finished printing, clipped the papers into a folder, and handed it to Ethan. This is the copy for submission. I'll keep the duplicate in the library as required by record regulations. If anyone asks, I'll answer according to the law. Ethan bowed his head slightly. Thank you, Emily. Emily smiled. Thank you for bringing her here instead of leaving her to fend for herself. When they left the library, the evening breeze swept gently through the street. Ethan guided Emma across the crosswalk. He knew Karen would not stop. She had money, lawyers, and cameras ready to record any story she wanted to tell. He tightened his grip on the folder, reminding himself of the rhythm. Slow, steady, lawful. Night fell as they returned to the building. In the elevator, Emma rested her face against his shoulder, breathing evenly. Are you tired today? Ethan asked softly. I'm fine. I don't want to go back to that house. You will never have to go back to a place that scares you. The elevator doors slid open, and they stepped into the hallway. Ethan paused for half a second. Across the street, beneath the shadow of the trees, a black car was parked. Its headlights blinked once, then went out, like a deliberate wink. Ethan ushered Emma inside, locked the door securely, and stepped out onto the balcony to look down. In the driver's seat, Robert Hayes held a cigarette between his lips, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the steering wheel. The cigarette glow cut through the darkness, revealing the cold smile at the corner of his mouth. He tilted his head back, as if he knew exactly which apartment had the light on. The two men looked at each other across the silent distance. Ethan did not retreat. He simply drew the curtain closed, made a quick call to the building's security, and sent Anderson a single message. They followed us to the door. Outside, the headlights blinked once more. Then silence. The car did not leave. A quiet threat lingered, waiting just below the building. Ethan drew the curtains shut and dialed security. He instructed them to increase patrols around the lobby and the parking garage. 15 minutes later, the black car finally drove away. Ethan jotted a quick note to Anderson. They showed up in person. The next morning, he took Emma to the library. Emily greeted her at the children's desk and handed her a box of crayons. She leaned toward Ethan and spoke softly. I'll sit with her. Go ahead and take care of your work. Ethan nodded. resting a hand on Emma's shoulder. "I'll be right back. Stay here with Miss Emily." Emma gave a small nod, clutching her stuffed bear, her eyes following him until he disappeared behind the shelves. Ethan returned to the old Collins neighborhood. He rang the bell at apartment 2B. The door cracked open. An elderly woman with neatly cut white hair and dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep peered out. She was Dorothy Wilson, the family's longtime neighbor. "Sorry to bother you so early." Ethan introduced himself briefly, handing over a business card. "I was a close friend of Richard's. I need to hear what you saw yesterday." Dorothy pressed her lips together, one hand gripping the edge of the door as if afraid someone might overhear. She whispered, "I saw them. They dragged the girl into the yard. Robert grabbed her wrist, and Karen held a bucket of water. They poured it straight over her head. She was shaking like a leaf. But," Dorothy pulled back slightly, "I was afraid to speak. They have money. They have connections. I'm scared." Ethan didn't press. He exhaled slowly, meeting her eyes. "If you stay silent, Emma will never be free. I'll stand with you. You won't be alone." Dorothy stayed quiet for a long moment. Then she opened the door wider, as if opening her heart. "I want to tell the truth, but I need to know I'll be protected. My attorney will arrange protection for witnesses. You only need to say exactly what you saw." Ethan handed her a slip of paper with Anderson's phone number. "He doesn't talk much, but he gets things done." They walked to the back lot. Near the edge of the parking area, a man sat on an old wooden crate, wearing a worn jacket with frayed shoulders, turning a piece of dry bread in his hand. He was Frank Miller, the homeless man often seen around the building. Dorothy called out, "Frank, come over here for a moment." Frank squinted at Ethan, instinctively wary. Ethan handed him a cup of hot coffee he had just bought on the corner. "I was a friend of Richard's." Frank accepted it, the warmth seeping into his cracked hands. He cleared his throat. "I saw it yesterday. They dragged that girl like she was a sack. She slipped on the steps, crying without a sound. I wanted to step in, but Robert glared at me. I've got nothing left to lose. But that girl, she doesn't deserve to live like me. I'll tell the truth." Ethan gave his shoulder a firm squeeze. "Thank you." He passed him another card along with a paper noting an appointment time. "This is your meeting with Mr. Anderson. I'll be there with both of you." Dorothy nodded. Frank nodded. The three of them stood in silence for a few seconds, sealing a small vow in the daylight. In the afternoon, Ethan returned to the library to pick up Emma. Emily had already printed a timeline comparison chart. She spoke quickly. "I managed to contact the hospital records department. The timing of the transfer contract doesn't match Richard's sedated condition." Ethan replied crisply, "Good. Tomorrow we meet Anderson. Submit this along with the witness." As night fell, Emma went to bed early, hugging her teddy bear, her breathing steady. Ethan opened his computer in the study. He searched through old emails and service accounts tied to the car Richard's wife used to drive. A maintenance folder appeared. There was a technical report from the manufacturer with a short note in English. BCM, ECU log, abnormal override entries. Ethan opened the attachment. A circuit map appeared on the screen, with strange log entries marked exactly 1 week before the accident. He called a friend who was an automotive engineer and put him on speaker. "I'm looking at some odd logs in the BCM. It's not related to the brakes. Looks like someone tampered with the central control unit, forcing incorrect commands." The voice on the other end answered firmly, "If that's the case, it took serious skill. No amateur could have done it, and they'd need direct access to the vehicle." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I remember Richard often complained that Robert would borrow the car, saying things like picking up his girlfriend or taking it in for maintenance back when Richard's wife was still alive." "So that's it," the friend said briefly. "Keep the raw data intact, print it, make multiple backups. Don't touch the car anymore." Ethan saved copies, printed the files, and placed them in a waterproof pouch. On the cover of the folder, he wrote a single line, "ECU, not the brakes." Likely Robert's handiwork. He leaned back in his chair and glanced through a gap in the curtain. The city lights still glowed, but across the street, under an awning, a dark figure stood motionless. It looked as if the person had been there for a long time, patient enough to wait for someone to slip. Ethan pulled the curtain shut, turned off the light in the study, and left only the nightlight in the hallway. He walked to Emma's room and peeked in. The little girl was still asleep, clutching her teddy bear tightly, a strand of hair falling across her cheek. Ethan whispered, as if speaking to himself, "Robert, you didn't just kill your brother. You took the life of Emma's mother too. You stole happiness. You stole the laughter of a whole family." He locked the balcony door and double-checked the security system. His phone buzzed. A message from Anderson read, "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., bring the witness and the technical evidence." Ethan closed the phone and sat down on the floor, leaning against Emma's door. He shut his eyes for a few minutes. Outside the window, the shadowy figure remained. A tiny spark from a cigarette flared and then went dark. No footsteps followed, but the feeling of being watched lingered, sharp and undeniable, like a shadow pressed against his back. The next morning, the phone rang insistently. Ethan had just opened the curtains when he saw Dorothy's message. The kitchen window was shattered, and a brick lay in the middle of the floor. He called her right away. Dorothy's voice trembled. "Last night, I heard a noise. When I went out, the glass was broken. I was terrified." Ethan told Emma to stay with Mr. Harris in the lobby, then drove to the old apartment. Dorothy opened the door, her hands still dotted with glass shards. Ethan put on gloves and picked up the brick. Wrapped around it was a piece of paper with 3 scrawled words, "Keep quiet." Dorothy exhaled sharply. "I know who did this, but I will not take back my words." Before Ethan could put the brick away, his phone buzzed again. A church volunteer reported that Frank had been attacked in the back alley and was receiving first aid. Ethan hurriedly drove Dorothy there. Frank was slumped against a wall, blood seeping from the corner of his mouth, his eyes swollen and bruised. He tried to grin. "I still have my teeth, don't worry." Ethan bent down. "Who did this?" Frank shrugged. 3 guys. Couldn't see their faces. They told me to keep my mouth shut. I can't do that." Dorothy placed a water bottle in Frank's hand. "We go together. No one gets left behind," Ethan called the lawyer. On the other end was the calm voice of Professor William Anderson. "Document everything. Take photos of the scene. Get Frank examined so we have a medical report. I'll notify the court about the witness intimidation." By noon, Ethan returned to pick up Emma. She had just come out of the children's reading room, clutching her teddy bear tightly against her chest. When Ethan briefly explained what had happened to Dorothy and Frank, Emma's face turned pale. "It's all because of me. If I weren't here, they wouldn't have been hurt." Ethan froze, then knelt down to meet her eyes. "No, Emma, the guilty ones are them. You don't carry anyone's sin. But they hate me. They hate the truth. They don't hate you." That afternoon, Ethan brought Emma to the law office downtown. On the 14th floor, the brass nameplate read, "William Anderson, Esquire." A middle-aged woman opened the door, introducing herself as Paula Green, the legal assistant. She smiled at Emma. "Would you like some hot cocoa?" Emma gave a tiny nod. Anderson stepped out of the conference room, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a calm, clear gaze. He shook Ethan's hand, then leaned slightly toward Emma. "Hello, sweetheart. In here, the grown-ups will talk about complicated things, but I'll try to make sure you understand in simple words." In the small meeting room, Ethan placed a USB drive and a folder on the table. Anderson plugged in the device, listened to the recording, and arranged the papers in order. Dorothy's prepared statement, photos of the broken glass, Frank's injury photos, the timeline chart Emily had printed, and the technical report on the car's electronic control system. Anderson spoke slowly, almost like counting beats. "We need hard evidence. Testimony in court, recordings with verified digital forensics, and technical proof from the car. I will request a witness protection order for Dorothy and Frank. At the same time, I'll petition to have the child placed in your care under an emergency guardianship." Ethan nodded. "I have enough to start. But the truth about her mother's accident, I can't tell the girl everything yet. She would break." The door creaked softly. Emma stood at the threshold holding a cup of cocoa, her eyes wide. She must have caught half a sentence. "My mom. It wasn't an accident?" The room fell silent. Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder, his voice trembling but clear. "One day you'll know it all. But today, let me carry this with you." Emma looked up, her lips quivering. "Then, did my dad know?" "Your father left what was necessary to protect you. He loved you very much," Anderson added, his tone steady. "Our job is to bring the truth into the light, piece by piece, by the law, at the right time. You are not alone." Emma nodded, her eyes wet but clinging to the words "not alone." Paula entered carrying a thin folder. "This is the petition for a temporary protection order and the hearing schedule." Anderson signed, then turned to Ethan. "Tonight, limit movement in and out. Don't let the girl go outside alone. I've notified the local police about the threats." By late afternoon, they left the courthouse. Ethan held Emma's hand on the way home. Mr. Harris in the lobby looked around more carefully than usual. In the elevator, Emma leaned against Ethan's arm and whispered, "If I have to speak in court tomorrow, I'll tell the truth." Ethan tightened his grip on her hand. "I'll be standing right beside you." Night came. Ethan prepared a simple dinner. Emma ate little, but for once, she did not stop halfway through. After her bath, she sat by the window drying her teddy bear, quiet as if talking to someone invisible. Ethan reorganized the files, checking everything one last time. Backup USB, photos of the scene, technical reports, draft testimonies. The television in the living room switched on to the evening news. The anchor read briskly, "New developments in the custody battle of the Collins child." The screen showed Karen in a black dress, eyes glistening as she stood before the cameras. She spoke clearly, almost rehearsed. "I will fight to regain custody of my daughter. Millionaire Ethan Collins is nothing but a greedy man trying to seize control of the shares." The living room seemed to sink under the weight of her words. Emma turned, clutching her teddy bear tightly. Ethan didn't switch off the television. Instead, he stepped forward, blocking half the screen so that Emma saw only him. "Listen to me," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "Noise is not the truth." The broadcast continued. Bold headlines scrolled across the screen. Outside the window, the city lit up. Another night was falling, and the storm of public opinion had only just begun. Ethan turned off the television, stacked the files neatly, and checked the USB one last time. The next morning, he held Emma's hand as they walked through the gates of the New York County Family Court. The hallway was packed with people. William Anderson walked beside him, carrying a thick case file. He gave a small nod to Paula Green, the paralegal, who was already waiting. A court bailiff, Miller, guided them into courtroom 3. Inside, Judge Patricia Coleman sat high on the bench, her expression stern. To the left stood defense attorney Avery Clark, representing Karen. To the right, in the public gallery, several reporters were present. Karen wore a black dress, her eyes red as she looked straight into the cameras. Robert sat beside her, in a dark shirt, his face carefully set in the role of the kind uncle. The clerk called out the names of the parties. The judge tapped her gavel. "Court is now in session." Attorney Clark rose first. "My client, Mrs. Karen Collins, is a desperate mother. The child was taken from her home against the guardian's will by Mr. Ethan Collins, a powerful businessman. This is an abduction disguised as protection." Karen sobbed right on cue, pressing a handkerchief to her eyes. Ethan stood tall, his voice steady. "Your Honor, this child was subjected to psychological abuse. They dragged her outside and threw water on her, as if she were an object. I have witnesses." The judge said, "Bring in the witness." Dorothy Wilson stepped forward, her hands trembling. She introduced herself as the downstairs neighbor. "I saw them pull the girl out." Robert was gripping her wrist. Karen carried a bucket of water and poured it straight over her head. The little girl shrank back and begged. Attorney Clark interrupted. "Do you bear any personal grudge against my client?" Dorothy shook her head. "Number, I was afraid. Afraid because they have money and influence. But the truth is, I saw it happen." Frank Miller came next. He wore a worn knit cap, his voice rough but firm. "I sleep in the alley out back. I heard the child crying. When I looked up, I saw her being dragged and stumbling. I wanted to step in, but Robert stared at me like he would kill me if I moved. I'm saying this because I don't want any child living the way I've had to." The judge nodded, taking notes. Anderson carefully placed the USB on the table. Your Honor, this is a recording hidden inside the teddy bear left by the child's birth mother. I have verified the timestamps and metadata. With the court's permission, I'd like to play it. The courtroom fell silent. Richard's weary, shaky voice came from the speakers. What did you put in the bottle? I don't need this. When I drink it, my heart races. Karen, where did you get it? Robert's voice, cold as ice, replied, The doctor prescribed it. Just drink. And then Karen's whisper came, so close it brushed against the microphone. Let him drink more. A murmur rose and then faded. Robert's face turned pale as he shot up from his seat. Fake, fabricated. Anyone could splice that together. Anderson didn't turn his head. Your Honor, I have submitted a verification report of the file's origin, the time of recording, and confirmation there are no signs of tampering. This is the attached report. He pulled out another bundle of papers, bound with a red clip. Furthermore, regarding the death of Mr. Richard's wife, the technical report shows that the central control system of the vehicle had been tampered with. It was not the brakes. The ECU and BCM parameters were altered. Whoever did this had both the skill and access to the car. The judge looked up. And the source of this report? Anderson replied. From the maintenance company, with system logs. It has been authenticated by their technical representative under sworn testimony. Attorney Clark tried to interject. Speculation. No one has directly named my client, Anderson continued. Robert Hayes had a habit of helping by taking the vehicle in for maintenance while the victim was still alive. This is the garage log we retrieved. The entries match the exact time of interference. The judge turned his eyes toward the defense table. Miss Karen Collins and Mr. Quas. Robert Hayes, do you wish to make a statement? Karen's hands clutched the edge of her chair, her voice faltering. I cared about that girl. I was only teaching her. Ethan no longer looked at her. He leaned down and spoke softly to Emma. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Emma took a deep breath, but still rose to her feet. Her voice was small, yet startlingly clear. If they cared about me, they wouldn't have thrown water on me. They wouldn't have laughed when I cried. The courtroom fell silent. Emma's hands gripped the hem of her dress, her eyes no longer hiding behind anyone. The judge watched her for a long moment, then turned to the clerk. Record the child's words verbatim. Anderson presented another document, a timeline chart prepared by Emily Carter. This is the evidence of the share transfer agreement, signed while Mr. Richard was under heavy sedation. He could not have signed it himself. The signature samples do not match. The judge flipped through quickly, his gaze sharpening. The court acknowledges signs of forgery in this civil document. Attorney Clark began to rise, but Robert lost control, snarling. That brat is lying, and he's just after the money. Karen tugged at Robert's sleeve, her hands trembling violently. The judge struck the gavel, his voice firm. Order. With these preliminary findings indicating risk of abuse, the court issues an emergency protection order for the child, Emma Collins, placing her under the temporary guardianship of Mr. Ethan Collins. Furthermore, the court orders the immediate detention of Miss Karen Collins and Mr. Robert Hayes to facilitate investigation into charges of poisoning, child abuse, and asset misappropriation. The next hearing will be scheduled once the district attorney supplements the case file. Karen collapsed into her chair. Robert stood frozen like a stone pillar. The court officers stepped forward, cuffing them with practiced movements. Camera flashes burst across the room. Emma broke down in tears, throwing herself into Ethan's arms. Do I have anyone left? Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her head against his chest. You still have me, and you still have yourself. The gavel struck once more. The noise of the room surged back like a crashing wave, but within that small embrace, a warm silence opened, defying the storm rising through the courtroom. After the final strike of the gavel, Ethan signed the order for temporary guardianship. He put his arm around Emma's shoulder as they left the courtroom, her small hand gripping his and refusing to let go. In the hallway, Paula Green handed over an envelope with the transfer papers and reminded him about the upcoming appointments with the welfare office. Ethan nodded in thanks, then bent down and said to Emma, "Let's go home together." That afternoon, a locksmith came to change the lock. The wooden door that had once been slammed in Emma's face now opened with a soft click. She stood at the threshold, her little shoes frozen in place. Ethan laid a hand on her back. "From now on, this place will hold no more shadows. We'll turn it into a beginning." Emma drew a deep breath and stepped inside. The old room still carried the smell of paint, and a few empty frames on the wall seemed to wait for new memories to fill them. The next morning, people began to arrive one by one. Emily Carter brought a box of children's books and a few small rugs. Smiling, she placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Your reading room has been waiting for these books." Dorothy Wilson carried a bag of fabric curtains she had sewn overnight. "I'm no expert with my hands, but I wanted the windows to have warm colors." Frank Miller showed up with a new jacket and a toolbox in hand. He smiled faintly. "Let me try to build a few wooden shelves. Street skills still work." William Anderson reviewed every paper, every permit, and the plan to transform the house into a community center. And a new face appeared, Linda Johnson, the owner of the corner cafe, about 60, with a voice as warm as an oven. She set down a tray of sandwiches and hot soup on the table. "I don't have fancy words, but no one heals on an empty stomach." All day, the sounds blended together: hammering, laughter, the rustle of wallpaper. Ethan carried paint cans, Frank climbed ladders, Dorothy measured curtains, Emily labeled books, Linda made cocoa, and Anderson moved from room to room, checking off the tasks that still needed filing. On a whiteboard, Ethan wrote one line and circled it: Harbor Light Center. By evening, Emma stood in front of her room. The walls had been repainted in bright colors. The old bed now had fresh sheets. She touched the surface of the desk, the place where a photo with her father used to sit. "I'm afraid to come in here," she whispered. Ethan leaned against the doorway. "You have the right to be afraid, and you have the right to stay." Emma nodded. She picked up her stuffed bear, set it on the pillow, then turned and said softly, "I want to hang my dad's picture back." The following day, a family welfare worker came by. Miss Rivera, a woman with short hair, carried a look that was gentle yet firm. She asked Emma a few simple questions, jotted down quick notes, and glanced around at the house, steadily taking on new life. Before leaving, she said to Ethan, "The best thing for a child is an adult who is consistent. Keep it up." The week passed. Emma went back to school. On the first day, Ethan walked her to the gate and waited until she was safely in class before leaving. That evening, Emily opened a little reading corner for the neighborhood kids. Frank had just finished building 2 long wooden shelves, the fresh scent of pine lingering in the room. Linda brought over a tray of cookies, warning, "Don't eat too many or you'll get a stomachache," then secretly tucked an extra bag into Emma's backpack to take home. Dorothy sat by the window knitting a scarf, occasionally glancing up to smile at Emma. Anderson received the first document recognizing the house as a temporary community center, though they were still waiting for the full permit. One night, as Ethan was folding a blanket in the living room, Emma stepped out, her fingers twisting at the hem of her shirt. She looked at him for a long time, then asked bluntly, "Do you really want to be my dad? Or is it just because you miss my father?" The room fell silent for several breaths. Ethan set the blanket down and crouched, so his eyes met hers. "At first, it was because of your father. He once saved me when I was a child. I thought I was paying a debt, but now it's because of you. My heart chooses you." Emma bit her lip, her eyes brimming with tears. "If one day you no longer remember my father, would you still choose me?" Ethan gave a faint smile. "I might forget many things, but I will never forget the words I've spoken." By the weekend, a temporary sign reading Harbor Light Center hung on the porch. Curious children from around the block wandered in. Emma, shy at first, grew more confident. She pointed to the shelves of books, handed out crayons, and showed them how to fold paper airplanes. When one boy asked timidly, "Do you live here all the time?" Emma nodded. "Yes, and you can come here every afternoon." Christmas Eve drew near. Linda laid the table, Emily hung paper lanterns, Dorothy set out a bowl of peppermint candies, and Frank built a Christmas tree from old wood. Ethan placed a small box on the table, wrapped in purple paper with a white ribbon. When the house grew quiet, he called to Emma, "Come here, sweetheart." Emma sat down, her eyes moving from the box to him. Ethan nodded. "Go ahead, open it." She untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was a new purple scarf, soft and long enough to drape over her shoulders. Beneath the scarf lay a thin envelope, the paper yellowed with age. Emma pulled it out. The handwriting was familiar, steady. Richard Collins. Her hands trembled as she looked up at Ethan. He gave a small nod. She opened the letter. The first line was written clearly. "If you are reading this, it means the truth has come to light. Trust Ethan, because I trust him more than anyone." Emma clutched the letter to her chest. Outside the window, the Christmas lights flickered on. Inside, the room grew silent for a single beat, as if to let Richard's words rest in the air before anyone breathed again. A new chapter was about to begin, and this letter was the door. Emma folded Richard's letter, placed it into the small wooden box Ethan had made for her, then locked it with the tiny key that hung from the strap on her wrist. A year had passed since that moment. Today, she stood on a chair, tying the last ribbon onto the wooden sign above the porch. Ethan held the ladder, looking up. "Is it steady?" Emma smiled. "It's steady." She jumped down, the purple scarf on her shoulders fluttering lightly. Inside, the Harbor Light Center glowed with warm lights. Homeless children gathered, each holding a cup of hot cocoa that Linda Johnson had prepared. Emily Carter laid out books on the table with a label that read "Christmas Gifts." Dorothy Wilson adjusted the curtains she had sewn by hand. Frank Miller switched on the string of lights he had crafted from recycled wood. Professor William Anderson arrived a little late, carrying a thick envelope. Emma ran around the Christmas tree, her purple scarf brushing against her cheeks, her eyes sparkling. She bent close to whisper into the ear of a teddy bear sitting on the shelf. "Today I won't cry anymore." Ethan stood near the door, smiling at her, then looking out at the porch. Memories surged back. The day he had seen the little girl drenched with a bucket of water in broad daylight, trembling, lifting her face as if begging for help. He whispered softly, only for himself to hear, "Richard, I kept my promise." Anderson stepped forward, his voice low. "There's official news." He opened the envelope and handed Ethan a thick court ruling stamped with the seal. Robert Hayes and Karen Collins have been sentenced heavily for poisoning, abuse, and fraud in seizing property. The tampering of the control system in Richard's wife's car has been confirmed. Technical evidence and witness testimony sealed the case. Ethan exhaled, folding the papers closed. "Thank you, Bill." Emily, having overheard, smiled. "Justice may come late, but it never disappears." Ethan called out, "Come here, sweetheart." Emma ran to him and held his hand. Anderson leaned down. "Congratulations, brave girl." Emma nodded, looked at Ethan, then suddenly spoke slowly and clearly, as if declaring something long kept inside. "Dad, from now on I'm not afraid anymore." The whole room paused for a beat. Ethan tightened his hand around hers, his eyes wet. "Yes, my daughter." Linda gave a small whistle. "It's time." The children crowded around the tree. Frank flipped the switch, and the lights burst into brilliance. Dorothy handed out peppermint candies. Emily placed a wrapped book into each child's hands. "Open them together." The sound of tearing paper filled the room, followed by bright cheers, joyful but not chaotic. On the wall, the newly hung board shone under the string of lights. Harbor Light Center, where every child has the right to hope. Emma tugged Ethan's hand, leading him to the corner of the room where Richard's photo was placed with care. She set down a small wooden star that Frank had carved, then whispered, "Dad, I read the letter. I did everything you asked. I believe." Ethan rested his hand on her shoulder. "And you helped many other children believe with you." Anderson leaned close and said quickly to Ethan, "The permanent guardianship papers will be ready after the holidays. The court wants to review a few more procedural items, but it's only a formality." Ethan nodded, unable to hide a faint smile. The children gathered to sing. Their voices were uneven but warm. Emma turned back and raised her hand. "Dad, can we sing together?" Ethan replied, "Lead me in." The two of them stood side by side, their voices joining the crowd, not needing to be loud, only steady in rhythm. Outside the glass doors, snow began to fall, thin as dust. Paula Green, Anderson's assistant, stopped by and handed a small gift bag to Emma, introduced herself, then hurried back to the front office. Emma smiled, thanked her, and placed the bag next to her teddy bear. She turned and hugged Ethan tightly, as if confirming the words she had just spoken. Ethan held her back, pressing his forehead gently against her soft hair. The church bells nearby rang out, deep and steady. The whole center grew quiet for a moment, as if everyone was listening to a single shared heartbeat. Snow on the porch settled over the new sign, glowing beneath the string lights. Emma looked up at the sky through the window, her small hand gripping Ethan's. She spoke clearly now, no longer trembling. "Mom, Dad, I am not alone anymore." Ethan bent down, his voice soft but resolute, tender as a vow, "And you will never be alone again." The story closes with the warm lights of the Harbor Light Center, but the message remains open. When evil pushes us into darkness, kindness lights the way. Karen and Robert have paid the price before the law. Emma has been embraced with love and taught how to stand tall. And Ethan kept the promise he made to a fallen friend and became the family his heart had chosen. That is the final note we want to leave with you. The wicked will be punished, the good will be rewarded, and justice may come late, but it never fails to arrive. Where do you see yourself in this story? In the moment of hurt like Emma, or in the decision to rise again like Ethan? Have you ever witnessed an injustice exposed, or a kind hand reaching out at just the right time? If you had an Emma near you, what would you do today to ease her fear? Tell us your thoughts, because even a single line from you could be the light guiding someone who feels lost. I also want to check in with you. How have you been lately? Did this story bring a lump to your throat at any point? If your day feels a little heavy, I hope this ending gives you a touch of warmth. Our channel will always be here to listen, so please leave a comment, and don't forget to share this video so that more people can hear these heartwarming and healing stories. Thank you for being with us. Every view and every word of feedback you give is the encouragement that keeps us going, so we can continue telling stories that heal, stories that remind us that at the end of the road, the light is always waiting.